Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, a very warm welcome to our debate. I'm Veselin Vachkov, director of Strategeo Institute, one of the proud co-organizers of today's event. And it's a real pleasure and privilege to welcome you, of course, on behalf of Strategeo, but also on behalf of the other organizer, the Anglo-American Institute, and I'm really grateful for their hospitality. Without further ado, I would like to pass the baton to Mr. Jan Machacek, the founder and president of Strategeo. For those of you that don't know him, he is a well-known journalist, economic expert, rock musician, and previously anti-communist dissident. So Jan will perhaps tell you a couple of words about the Institute and will introduce our distinguished panel. So the floor and the mic is yours.
Thank you, Veselin, and thank you, all of you, for coming. And as it was said, it's our first event. The reason I am president is that we are so small that we don't have a board. And so we would be happy if you enjoy today's event and will coming on future events which are already in the pipeline, but we will tell you at the end. So this early evening is devoted to the American elections. I would like to first introduce all the panelists, starting from the window side. So Tomáš Klvaňa is a visiting professor at NYU Prague. Welcome. Ondřej Hejma is a musician and translator. Welcome, Ondřej. Holcomb is a student here from Anglo-American University, and she was chosen in among the students to represent the students. So we are very glad that we have you. And Joch is a professor here at Anglo-American University. And Joch, who all you know from Czech media, is a Czech intellectual and teacher and also director of the Civic Institute, and very knowledgeable person about America from all different perspectives. So my plan for today is that first every panelist would have a 5-minute, maximum 7-minute opening speech, and I would like all of you to describe or to tell us what are your reflections, where is America standing now, what are the issues in the current elections, what is the state of polarization, what are the causes of polarization, how this polarization differs from any other society globally, because we are witnessing polarization almost everywhere these days, and what is in stake, like is it, some people believe that it's the fate of democracy is in stake, and some people believe that some people cannot accept different results of the elections they would wish for. So it's, I think we can also touch on this. But in the second half of the debate, we would try to focus a little bit more about your expectation about both scenarios of the presidential elections on the world, and mainly about Atlantic relationship in both economic sphere and security sphere. But let's start with the first kickoff, and we would start with Tomáš. Yes.
Many thanks. Thanks for inviting me here to Strategeo and Honza. Really glad to see such a diverse, in terms of views on the United States, such a diverse crowd. So we will actually have a debate today, I would imagine, because we come from very different political environments and also parts of the political spectrum. To address some of these questions that were posed to us, every election in the last decade in the United States has always been advertised as the most decisive, the election that possibly might end democracy, right? And therefore, it's really important for people to be engaged. So we have to take these admonitions and also sometimes screams with a grain of salt, because there is, due to the nature of public discourse, not just in the United States but everywhere in the world, a good degree of exaggeration here, right? This is obviously because of social media, which rewards the most extreme voices, but also it is due to a different atmosphere, different economic and social environment from what we used to experience 10, 15, 20 years ago. The United States has experienced several important setbacks over the last 25 years, starting in 2001, obviously, attack on New York and Washington, D.C., which, among other things, tainted immigration. Right? Immigration, the United States has always been this nation of immigrants, but increasingly from the right, we see a backlash against immigration. And to some extent that is understandable, because the attack was perpetrated by Islamist terrorists in 2001. And so that fear of extremism is there, as is in Europe, right? Then we went through the financial crisis, which put to the test the entire system, and again, created a backlash or strengthened this backlash against free market system and everything that went under the rubric of neoliberalism, which I don't like to use because it's being used by the left as a slur. But anyway, this is where we have been. And then, of course, we went through COVID, the pandemic, and that put to the test our supply chains that have developed in this time of globalization over the 20, 25 years. But also questioned some of the ideas, some of the presumptions that were kind of natural behind or before globalization. So it's not just social media, but the overall environment contributed to a significant polarization and sort of very underscoring of extreme voices, right? If you want to be heard in public discourse today, it's really easy to play on the emotional makeup of people, Americans in this case, right? The most extreme voices, the most emotional voices tend to be really heard, and that has influenced our politics and political discourse over the last 10 years, 15 years, definitely quite a bit. In terms of polarization, is it worse or is it the same as everywhere in the world, right? So we see this everywhere. We see this in Europe, we see this in Asia, but of course the United States and especially American culture is different from the rest of the world in that it has always rewarded extremes. That's why the United States is so successful. You know, any new idea is always first introduced in the United States because Americans, because of their tolerance, are very open to new ideas compared to Europeans, for example, especially continental Europeans. And so that there is this tendency towards pushing, like pushing ideas to extreme. This sometimes brings about lots of innovation, lots of great ideas in culture, lots of creativity, but also there's not enough forces that would center this discourse, right, as in Europe. And so it has also its negative consequences. And so American culture, because it is so open to extremes, has always rewarded these extreme ideas, or at least has not inhibited these extreme ideas. And therefore, right now, the situation in the United States in politics is, I would say, worse than elsewhere, because, for example, due to the nature of this discourse, the campaign that we have been experiencing has not discussed some serious issues and some serious themes that are going to definitely influence our lives and the lives of our children in the next couple of decades. I would just name two, right? One is artificial intelligence. There has probably not been one word uttered about, or serious word about artificial intelligence, although there are serious people, serious experts in the field talking about tremendous evolution of artificial intelligence expected in the next couple of years. There's some people even believe that artificial general intelligence might be kind of developed over the next 18 months to 2 years. I'm very skeptical towards any timelines, but anyways, this is going to change our not just communication, but it's also going to change our labor markets. And there was no serious discussion in American election campaign about this, right? The other one is China, the relationship between the United States and China. I would say these two issues, not global warming, although it is a serious problem, but artificial intelligence and the United States relationship with China are two most important issues on this planet.
And Tomáš, I will have to.
Yeah. Okay.
So
The problem is that these two issues have not been discussed, and that's because politics has become kind of really part of this infotainment.
Okay, perfect. So I think it would be polite now that George, like a representative of of the university.
I'd like to kind of build off of the background that was provided and actually point a little bit earlier back into the 90s when Newt Gingrich and kind of the Republican Revolution in Congress came, and there was the introduction of this strategy of kind of scorched earth politics between the parties that was seen to be beneficial and successful, and that this introduced an idea of not cooperating in order to gain political benefit. And then we can see the point about social media is well made. We also have, before social media, the rise of the 24-hour news channels that became, if they weren't born politically polarized, they quickly became it. So you have the combination of the culture of extreme with this political practice that is seen to be successful, and now a medium, first the news channels and then social media, where you can disperse this to greatest effect. And all of this is placed upon the structure of extreme in the American political system, which is with our primary voting system. So before candidates from the Republicans and the Democrats or whomever else hypothetically could be involved get to the point of facing each other, they have to face people within their own party. And in order to gain a bright spot to speak from, to gain the podium, this encourages you politically to go to the extremes of your own party, whether it's extreme left or extreme right. And the combination of all of these has been that over time, you are constantly running for election and you're constantly running in the primaries. So you're constantly being pulled to the extreme end of your party, whether it's the left party or a right party. So this is significant because it's not just a cultural aspect, but it's also kind of built into the system to encourage extreme political campaigning, at least for part of the time. Now that those campaign cycles have become constant, this kind of extreme campaigning is becoming constant as well. Again, trying to gain the media coverage, gain the spotlight for an ever greater period of time. I think one of the other big shifts that comes in the 90s is in the post-Cold War United States, the massive drawdown that there is in weapons manufacturing, Cold War era spending, which starts to go to hitting American industries at the same time that you have the opening up of trade with globalization. So that these traditional areas of Republican or Democrat support are facing at the same time economic pressures, economic changes that have resulted in this massive blue-collar dissatisfaction that the Trump campaign in 2016 as well as today has been making very strong use of. Taking these traditionally Democratic support demographics and actually speaking to them in ways that the Democrats haven't been, capturing their support, and again, getting more of them actually involved in the political process, making the Republican Party a bit stronger in its showings. What this means going forward, I think in particular with this election, there is a great domestic political focus, more than usual. Discussion of Ukraine is also kind of on the fringes because people coming out of the pandemic, issues of inflation, issues of employment, issues of housing, these domestic issues are far more important to the American electorate than international concerns, however important and valid they may be. When it comes to AI, I think this is an interesting point because yes, these big topics have not been directly addressed, and yet at the same time you have Trump's campaign making a lot of use of artificial intelligence, graphics and images, and you also have Elon Musk dancing on the stage behind Trump, and I don't think that's because he thinks that Trump is going to somehow crack down on any of the industries that Elon Musk is involved in, much less making some kind of restrictions, regulatory restrictions on artificial intelligence. So I think AI at the very least is in the background. But absolutely these larger issues, climate change, there's been brief mentions of the Green New Deal, the Democrats and Harris trying to shift the Green New Deal into a jobs creation program, a technology creation program. But these larger issues that go beyond, the American dinner table, as it were, aren't of greatest importance in this election to the electorate. The consequences of that, though, are yet to be seen. If Trump follows through on what he has said in his various campaign speeches regarding tariffs and tax cuts, there's an agreed position that this is going to cause problems for the American economy, which is in turn going to cause problems for the global economy as well. So we'll see how well that support and plans play out going forward.
Thank you, George. So we in the Strategeo Institute are happy when people have different opinions and can exchange them. And we would certainly didn't like to have a discussion like about someone who cannot defend himself here. And when we met first time with George about this discussion, I asked him like, do you know any Americans in Prague who are real some kind of Trumpians? Because there is a lot of people in Prague who are, I would call them like Reaganite Republicans or neocons or whatever. Then actually it was Tomáš Klvaňa's idea that we should invite Ondřej Hejma here. And since we didn't know any Americans who would be willing to play a role of a Trumpian, but so I don't want to push Ondřej to play a role of Trumpian, but I would like to give a floor to him. So thanks for accepting this role, Ondřej.
Okay, thanks for the invitation. It's a very unusual experience for me to speak to so many people on this sophisticated issue. And I will have to admit at the very beginning that the label of a Trumpian actually is correct, because in the year 2016, during the election night, Czech television had a huge panel that consisted exclusively from supporters of Hillary Clinton. Yes, it was Hillary Clinton. And it was seen in the media world as maybe not being the right thing, that they should have had an opponent or somebody from the other side. So to catch up, I was invited the next day with another friend of mine, and we were at that time probably the only two genuine Trumpians who were ready to admit it on television. So I'm a bit of an exotic animal here, and that's. But otherwise, I'm regular human being, so that's fine. And as to my qualification to even be here, of course, I was a translator. I'm still a musician. I've also graduated from Anglo-American Studies at the Charles University from 69 to 74. And I worked as a Prague correspondent for the Associated Press for 22 years. So I have watched American politics always from close up. And then I went into music, etc., etc. But that's that. So it's a very strange experience for me to talk about U.S. elections. We discussed this with Gwyneth before, as a Czech, sort of telling you, who are probably Americans or who know a lot about America. So I will not join Tomáš and others in sort of analyzing American politics seriously, because that's sort of out of my depth. But I will tell you my point of view from the Czech point of view, from the local point of view, as a local guy who watches America, who likes America, and is concerned about American politics. So I will say that when you ask me what is specific about this election, I will say it's the emotions. It's been said before, everybody agrees, it's the social media. But I do think that the emotions, the huge amount of emotions and the strength of the emotions is also exceptional, because I sort of disagree with Tomáš that, of course, the cliche is that every American election is the decisive one and the most important, and democracy is at stake, etc., etc. I think this year is actually true. I think it's true. I think a lot is at stake, if not everything. It's not only the American scene, but symbolically we speak as the other side is having a huge summit in Russia, with Russia, China, and everybody else sort of freely establishing a huge conglomerate of opponents of the Western kind of democracy, and I think the position of the United States is at stake in this world. That's what I see after so many years of my experience. So I think it is really an unusual election, and that is why maybe not only social media, but that is why the emotions are so high. What else could I disagree with? The issues. Well, the issues. I think it's okay. It's fine. The analysts know what are the three most important issues in American politics. Economy. I agree that immigration this year plays a big role. And to me, foreign policy, although it never decides American elections, we know that, is also there because of the time that we live in. And when Gwyneth asked me why on earth would you ever support Trump, which is a logical question, I told her I encountered this phenomenon for the first time maybe in 2016, because I knew about him as a tabloid person, not a serious man, you know, a showman on television, who would never sort of, and when they asked him, would you like to be president, he said no, and I thought, why do you even ask him, you know, and all of a sudden he's there, he's a president, and I noticed him for the first time in April 2016. I saw his lecture. I think it was in the Heritage Foundation or some sort of a think tank like that. And he outlined his foreign policy, which included theses like live and let live. You know, we should not enforce our values on people who do not want them. And that kind of sounded great to me. You know, as an East Bloc kid here living in Prague, because we're sensitive to that. We've always lived under other regimes, and other values were somehow imposed on us. And let's face it, you know, America in its history did intervene in other parts of the world and then try to impose its values on others. And so from that point of view, Trump seemed nice. Otherwise, he's horrible, we know that. But action speaks louder than words, and the fact that during his presidency he did not start another war was fantastic. That's about it.
Thank you, Ondřej, and I would like to ask Gwyn to take over now.
Okay. I mean, my political understanding of the world, especially American politics, began in 2016 when I was in middle school, and I think I was around 12 when Trump began his presidency. So my awareness of American politics really began, I would say, with his election. I mean, I was a conscious human being during Obama's presidency, but not, I think, to the same degree. But what I find really interesting about this election in specifics is how both Harris and Trump are targeting young voters. As one myself, I can kind of speak to that more because I think as social media has been brought up and emotion, I think those are two very key ways that both Harris and Trump are targeting young people, because young voters are such a huge demographic in deciding this election, I think, because they're a lot more undecided voters. You know, these are young people who might be for the first time trying to think outside of their parents' shadow, and they're turning to the people they trust besides their parents, which are often social media influencers. And so I think both Harris and Trump have been keenly aware of this and have been, so to say, maybe kind of attacking that angle in terms of addressing young voters by leaning towards that emotion, leaning towards the issues that affect both young people on both sides. And what I see more recently is the division of gender, young women and men being targeted in very different ways by Harris and Trump. Right, recently, Harris went on a podcast with Alex Cooper, the podcaster from Caller Daddy. I don't know if anyone has heard of this podcast, but it's a podcast that mainly focuses on sex and young women and their issues in politics. So Harris goes on this podcast and for about 40 minutes talks about abortion and sexual abuse and her history as a prosecutor in the United States and what she means to young women in this position. And Trump's doing the exact same thing. He's going on podcasts and YouTube videos with celebrities like Logan Paul, who is known for being a very machoistic male representation in social media. So he goes on to these podcasts with these male influencers talking about politics towards a young male audience. And while I think these issues do focus on both genders, I think there's a really interesting gendered divide in their politics among young voters. So young men are leaning towards Trump because they see a fear of erasure in politics, right? Because the main focuses for young people in this election, I think, are oftentimes sexual health and reproductive freedom and abortion and stuff. A young person as myself, that's an issue that captures my attention the most, right? But that's also an issue that really is focused on young women, whereas young men, I think, aren't seeing themselves as represented in politics, so they're leaning towards a politician who's really representing them in their perspective and going to these emotional social media advocates for them. So I think you see that on both sides, but I just think that is what's really interesting to me about the uniqueness of this campaign on both sides in general. But yeah, I guess that's what I can add.
Thank you very much, Gwen. It was great. Please, Roman Joch.
Okay, 5 minutes? 5 minutes, okay. I will try to be as coldly analytical as possible. I will hide from you my political preferences. The best way to hide them is to tell you openly that I would vote for neither. I think I'm convinced that Donald Trump is psychologically, mentally, by nature, incapable, unfit to be president of the Burkina Faso in Western Africa, and definitely not of the United States of America, a constitutional democracy and a republic. And I think that Kamala Harris is an empty person, empty vessel, stupid person, surrounded by fanatical ideologists. So I would vote for neither. Now, let us be analytical. First of all, if we look at the 7 states, 7 swing states or crucial states, those are under the margin of error of polls. So the elections could go either way. Either Kamala or Donald could be elected next president of the United States. I think that's not an existential election. I can live with Donald president or Kamala president. That's not an existential election. Don't overestimate our situation, our difficulties. No. In the history of the United States, I see 2 or 3 existential elections. First one, 1800, John Adams defeated by Thomas Jefferson. He voluntarily surrendered power. That was good for constitutional democracy. If you have police army on your hands and you are defeated and you surrender power after lost elections, you are a hero. Secondly, 1860, Abraham Lincoln, and so on, Civil War. And then 1980, Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter, defeat communism, Soviet Empire, or coexistent with that. Those were existential elections, but not this one. Lastly, I see a decline of religious faith in America in the last 24 years. America is becoming like Europe, like Western Europe, secularization. Those of you left liberals who fear religious right, you should fear more non-religious right. Because religions, Episcopalian, Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, whatever, at least preached brotherhood of men and sisterhood of women. Now, if you have lost that, you have only tribe. And America is becoming tribal. And I fear most those forces behind Trump who are secular, non-religious, and tribal. White male, power, for example. That's terrible, that's scary. That reminds us of our own European history And I wouldn't like to see that in America. And finally, feminism. As a lady said, there is a gender divide, a gender gap. Most young women support Kamala. Many young males support Donald. Was there perhaps a mistake by feminism, an overreach, which has pushed and pushes young males towards such an unworthy man as Donald? That's just a question to entertain. Was there or wasn't there? Now, my prediction, it's analytical. Elections could go both ways. As I have said, the polls in those 7 swing states are very close and under the margin error. But what I see as a trend is that the rise of Kamala preferences has stagnated, and the preferences of Donald are slowly, very moderately rising up. So my prediction is that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States of America, for better or worse.
Thank you very much, Roman. So I think it would be great now if George would take over, and I would like to ask panelists to react at each other. What was something you most disagree with? Plus, also, if you could include your view on what's the impact of both scenario on Atlantic relationship mainly and global issues.
Okay, thank you. I agree with the point that every election for the last several decades has been framed as an existential one, but I do agree that this one is more of an existential, a true existential election than the previous ones. It may not be an absolute do or die for the United States and for democracy. That won't be known really until 4 years after this election. But I think that it's, rather than an existential election for the United States, it's more of an existential election for the post-World War II order. Trump, whatever your views of Trump or Kamala are, Trump has repeatedly said that he is not a fan of NATO. He is not going to support NATO members if he deems them to not be pulling their weight. And while there's been a law put in place in the United States that prevents the president from unilaterally withdrawing the United States from NATO, the president doesn't need to withdraw the United States from NATO. If the president, who's commander-in-chief, refuses to use American forces in support of NATO treaty commitments, it's as good as the same thing. And Article 5, the cooperative security article, this is a psychological tool to prevent conflict from beginning. If there's doubt that the United States would follow through on that commitment, then whether or not the United States under Trump or whomever else actually does try and help defend NATO, that's only after an attack happens. That's not the best case scenario. You don't want an attack to happen at all. That's the whole point of Article 5. And the constant reassurance among members that, yes, we will come to the aid of anyone who is attacked. This is a very dangerous scenario, combined with Trump's other statements that within 24 hours he could solve the Russian-Ukrainian war, and it's relatively clear how he would do that. He would pressure Ukraine to give up territory that it has lost to Russia up to this point, and whether or not Ukraine does that, he'll stop trying to provide aid to Ukraine, which is essentially a slow death sentence, and forcing them to the table with Russia in a beneficial position. If that happens, the combination of those two things are going to tell Russia and other actors in the world that if they want to challenge the post-World War II order, they can. and the United States is not going to do anything to try and push back or to preserve it, which makes conflict more likely, and that is not in anyone's interest. I think I'll just kind of leave it there. Thank you.
Perfect. So I am looking for Ondřej to disagree.
Actually, not so much. No. I would. Well, if I'm here to disagree, then I will address Roman Joch a little bit with his statement that Trump couldn't manage Burkina Faso or something, that he's very stupid. I think that's extremely disrespectful to at least 50% of American population. I would never dare say anything like that. So I hope it was a joke or a hyperbole or something like that. I thank you, George, for agreeing that this election is exceptional. It is exceptional. And I will say, maybe add to what I said before, it's not that the democracy or United States is at stake, but it's, as you rightly said, it's the post-World War order, and it's the leadership of the United States in the world. That's what's at stake, which is pretty much the same thing, I would say. And that's that. And so otherwise, everybody said nice things. And we will see how the election will go, absolutely. And I thank Roman, actually. I criticize him, but I have to thank him for mentioning the religious aspect or the male-female thing, which is also extremely important. We know this is a game changer in this election with Kamala being there as a woman. It's really, really special. And I do agree with him that the fate of the male gender is in danger too in America. The feminist movement is getting stronger by the day. It culminates in the Me Too movement. And when we see the U.S. Army, which has not enough recruits, they lack 25% of the planned recruits, that is slightly frightening, because if the United States wants to maintain its leading role, its leadership, it has to be backed by power, really big power. And you know, that is what is at stake right now.
Thank you, Ondřej. So Tomáš now.
So I went really too long in the beginning, so let me be short here. I do agree this is a very important election. I don't think it's existential. I think that Trump, if he wins, let me go to the scenarios, it's going to be bad for the United States and bad for Europe for the following reasons. He obviously not just isn't a fan or friend of NATO, but he asked a couple of times his national security advisor, John Bolton, why can't we just leave NATO, right? John Bolton writes in his book, The Room Where It Happened, which is great. You should really read it if you haven't, that when he was waiting during NATO summits for the number ones to finish their deliberations, you know, he was waiting for them to leave the negotiation room. He never knew whether at that point NATO still existed, which was just amazing if you think of it, right? So this is an illustration of the fact that Donald Trump does not understand alliances. He wants to conduct his foreign policy bilaterally from the United States point of view and very narrowly defined economic self-interest. He does not understand the post-World War II order, so he would undermine that. Right? I don't know whether he would be able to completely destroy it. That's really difficult to know, because there are many factors that go into this. But I would be concerned, especially here in Central Europe, because we do want to have the United States in Europe. There is no substitution, internal European substitution for the United States here. right? But if there are some people, I believe, naive, who want Trump to win because this would be a shock therapy for Europe, and Europe would finally wake up. Never going to happen. Europe is not the same thing as unitary state in the United States or in China, right? Europe is not going to be the kind of superpower that's necessary for global security. In terms of her, if she wins, and I think the chances are really 50-50, yes, there has been some speculation over the last couple of days that the trend is towards Trump, but the polls are just too close, and I don't really know. I don't trust those polls, so it can really happen either way. If she wins, I think that essentially the Biden foreign policy would kind of within the mainstream would continue. She would support NATO, she would support Ukraine, she would even support Israel, despite the left wing of the Democratic Party. So that's one reason why I would support her. In terms of the United States internally, he is dangerous because he has, and we have seen it during his presidency, he has undermined democratic institutions. And that's really bad because if you look at the discourse today in the United States, there's lots of Hitler and fascism flying around, right? Because Democrats are becoming nervous. So I do not think he's a fascist. I do not think he's a Hitler. But he has fascist impulses, right? He's not a fascist because I would give him too much credit for that, right? He doesn't have any plan. Like he has an impulse. He wants to achieve what he wants to achieve. And when an institution stands in his way, he undermines it. And that's bad. He has undermined the media. He has undermined Congress. He has undermined elections. He has undermined other democratic institutions. And she would not do that. Democratic Party, whatever you think of the Democratic Party, and I don't like the left wing of the Democratic Party. There are some illiberal tendencies on the left too, but they are not systemically problematic, at least in the short run, right? Republican Party is a Trump cult at this time, right? You cannot have an open debate within the Republican Party about Trump. So I think that from this point of view, he would undermine democratic institutions. And let me remind you that it's democratic institutions that should govern us, not people. Let me go back to founding fathers, right? We should be governed by institutions, not by the people, by specific politicians, right? They are the only thing that protect us from our own bad sides. Okay, so that's something really serious. That's why I think this election is more serious than other elections.
I have to quickly jump in with one sentence only about the Hitler thing. Trump being Hitler and Kamala being communist. We've heard that from the other side as well, you know. And I say, you guys don't know what you are talking about. Because here in Prague, we have had fascism firsthand. My father was in a concentration camp, and we've had 40 years of communism. We know what it's like, and you are nowhere near that. So please stay away from that language.
Okay, Gwyn.
Oh, I generally like, on terms of like the transatlantic relations, I think that like with Trump, if he does come into office, you would see, like mentioned, a lot of a very different approach than what Biden has, obviously, on Ukraine. And I think that lack of also support of NATO is quite fascinating as well. In my research, I was kind of diving into how his relationship with NATO might go. And according to my research, hopefully it's right, in 2023, Congress did pass bipartisan legislation that would prevent a president from withdrawing from the alliance without congressional approval. So in terms of like thinking about if Trump comes to office and he wants to leave NATO, which he has threatened previously, it'd be interesting to see how he can go about doing that now with needing congressional approval. Whether he can gather the support from the Republican Party if they take a majority of the Congress, it would be interesting. But in terms of like Trump, I think he really does take like that American first approach in terms of all of his policies and all of his politics. And in terms of Harris, I do think that I disagree that she'll have much of the same approach as Biden. I think she's made it very clear in her running that she's going to be different than Biden. She has made it clear that she wants to be a different person, while at the end of the day, she is still a Democrat and she still follows much of the party lines. I do think that she'll be making different decisions because Biden really does come from a history of international relations and foreign affairs and has a different comprehension for how these systems and institutions work in terms of NATO and the UN. And I think he has a different level of respect for these institutions just from his own experience with them. And I think Harris, being slightly less experienced in terms of the field of foreign policy and working within an international sphere, is a bit more isolationist in terms of American policy. I mean, we also, like mentioned, we see this in the focuses of the campaigns on both sides. They're very American focused. They're focused on both domestic policy. They're focused on the housing crisis. They're focused on inflation. And I mean, a lot of these are obviously due because of the pandemic, you know. There is a level to which Americans, young Americans like myself included, feel the effects of the pandemic on their future prospects in terms of young people being able to afford homes or fair wages or situations of education in the United States, right? Debt from university education. And so I think in terms of foreign politics, it's going to be very different with both candidates if either wins, because there'll be such a shift in terms of how they view these institutions. So, anyways, that's, I think, me.
Okay, Tomáš, when I had a technical...
I think just two very short points on this is an excellent point you're making about the differences between Biden and Harris in their foreign policy, and I essentially agree with that. I was comparing her to Trump, right? So broadly understood, she would continue Biden's foreign policies, but of course, she's not very experienced in foreign policy. She didn't have those same experiences as Biden, obviously, and she comes from the West Coast, right? And so her attachment to Europe would be much weaker than Biden's, and so that's something we really need to calculate with. The second point on NATO, that is correct technically, yes. He will not be able to get out of NATO because he will not have 2/3 in each chamber. On the other hand, American presidents have all kinds of ways to weaken NATO. For example, he as a commander-in-chief can immediately say all troops from Europe and all troops from South Korea are coming home. Right? He doesn't need Congress for that. Imagine a scenario when Putin goes to Latvia or Lithuania. What is Trump going to do? Is he going to invoke the Article 5 of the Washington Treaty? I don't know. That would be also a very significant weakening of NATO if he didn't.
Well, we are going to quite a heated debate. To Ondřej, Hejma, as I have said, I cannot violate my conscience. I cannot vote for Donald Trump. But several times ago, my student, asked me, had the choice been Donald, Kamala, or my death, what would you choose? And I said very reluctantly, Donald. So I would prefer Donald to Kamala. Very reluctantly, but had I been an American citizen, I would not cast a vote for Donald, because I consider him to be unfit. That's the first point. Second point, Tomáš, I agree with everything. That's right. That's absolutely right. He can, as a commander-in-chief, he can pull forces from Europe, from South Korea, from whatever, wherever. Now, we know that. And let us be serious now. What should we do? We should arm ourselves. 2% is not enough. It's a joke. 3% maybe, 4% in the case of Poland. And even more, well, by a historical coincidence, there are two non-European countries which have nuclear weapons in Europe, America and Russia. And I don't consider Russia to be a European power. It's Euro-Asian power by mentality, by sentiment. They are not civilized European people. And which European people have nuclear weapons? Two countries only, Britain and France. Okay, thank you for that. In the future, I can imagine a scenario when Polish people would like to have a nuclear deterrent. So the issue of deterrence of Russia to invite Latvia will be on us, on Central Eastern Europeans. And the sooner we learn that lesson and recognize the necessity to do that, the better for us. Because if Trump is not elected, okay, we are free for some 4 years, and then there will be either right-wing, isolationist, Republican American president, Vance, or whomever, or left-wing, McGovernite president, and we will be in the same situation. So we must be serious. And eventually, considering the American constitutional system, I agree with Tomáš that instincts of Donald Trump are fascist, authoritarian. I completely agree. But I think he has no chance, because I think that the American constitutional system of division of powers and of federalism, Madisonian system, is strong enough to resist tendencies of one bastard. But what I really fear are democratic suggestions of changing the electoral college, replacing it with majoritarian democracy, of adding new justices to the Supreme Court, bypassing the process. That's what I am really afraid of. So I think that Donald Trump, a stupid idiot, is not capable to change, to subvert American constitutional system, because he is a stupid idiot. But Democrats who are clever, could subvert American constitutional system, and that's the scenario I fear more.
Yes, Judge.
So I just want to put your fears to rest. Nobody's going to be able to change the electoral college system. That's going to require too many states.
No chance.
There's no chance. So the electoral college is safe, whether you love it or not. And in terms of affecting American democracy, impacting the federal level is one thing, impacting state and local is another. The Republicans have far greater aptitude at affecting state and local politics than the Democrats do. So there's a concern for action there by the Democrats, whether it's founded or not. One thing to your point about spending on among European NATO countries, I think that it's not just an issue of spending. I think both the Europeans and the Americans need to invest in their manufacturing as something that has been seen with both sides wanting to give aid and material or sell aid and material to Ukraine. There is so much more demand in just this one area than can be supplied by the extra amounts of material that the Europeans and the Americans have in store. this is also one of the great dangers, I think, if the Russians and their operations, and the Iranians and their operations, and the Chinese and their operations, and the North Koreans and their operations, if they can continue to kind of help each other by disturbing different areas of the world and causing America to have to try and help their various allies around the world, they will deplete America's ability to do that. So I think that it's very important for both the Americans and the Europeans to increase their ability to manufacture weapon systems, to replace used weapon systems, because in any kind of peer, near-peer conflict, existing stocks are going to be depleted very, very quickly.
Okay, I cannot resist to have one remark to what Tomáš Klvaňa said, like with institution versus people. I think it's with founders, it's more that they emphasize the like non-personal rules versus like people. You know, that the dream was that, but it's not exactly institutions, because it could mean that what you said, like institutions are basically always good as they are, but there is a lot of space to reform institutions. If you and I don't want to like speak about Trump saying that Elon Musk is going to be mainline cost cutter of the institutions, but that's a different topic. But I would see it like rules, non-personal rules, whereas the politics, which is becoming more and more egomaniacal or egoistic, are focused on personalities. So it's just my little remark. So we are very glad that you are here, and now it's time to open the discussion. And I would like to ask you if you have questions, if that it is really questions, which doesn't mean that there can be opinion included in questions, obviously, but we are not asking for a lecture. So, so please, if you could introduce yourself and say on which panelist you are heading the question. So who wants to start?
Hello, everyone. My name is Mila Warren. I am a student here at Anglo-American University. And I had quite a few comments on, what's your name, sir? Yeah. Yes. Okay, I have a few questions regarding, first of all, saying that Trump is not a fascist, and we shouldn't call him that because we don't know what we're talking about. I have quite a few sources that go through Mussolini, Hitler, Trump, and identifying all of their rhetorics and how they are all lining up exactly, talking of othering, historical fiction, making up a time when the country was greater, saying this to the people within their country and identifying yourself as the sole leader who can save them and fix them. And I'm just curious how Trump is different than these fascist leaders and their rhetoric is not the same.
Okay, very briefly, I will not defend Trump. I'm not his advocate, and I'm certainly no specialist on his fascist instincts. I think it's just a disgusting statement that I heard from Kamala, who was quoting John Kelly, you know, his chief of staff, that he overheard him say something, you know, privately. That's a different game, you know. It's high level elections, emotions, etc. And I have to add that in the same way, Kamala should not be called communist because she is not a communist. That's all I wanted to say, and I'm certainly not going into analysis of his fascist instincts because I know nothing about them.
Let me just address that question because I'm more sympathetic to your view than Ondřej. Why I don't think it's useful to call him a fascist? Well, it's in the last couple of weeks during the election campaign, it makes no sense. Or no impact, right? It's just Americans, most Americans, when you say fascism, they see Auschwitz, right? They don't understand that there is a difference between fascism and Nazism. There's a difference between Mussolini and Salazar and Franco and other people. So it's just a stupid tactic to do this, right? It might be even counterproductive. The other reason why I think it's imprecise is that, again, it gives him too much credit. You know, he is not a thinking man. He doesn't really create an ideology. He doesn't know what fascism is. He knows nothing about history. He asked his John Kelly, you know, the guy who was head of his office, who were the good guys in the First World War, right? Come on, you know, the guy knows nothing about history. So yeah, he does have fascist impulses, but those fascist impulses are similar to Stalinist impulses. What you just named, what you just mentioned, you know, that's very similar to communist rhetoric. You know, it's similar to other authoritarian rhetoric. So I don't think it serves any purpose, especially now, especially 2 weeks before the elections. I have a great respect for Timothy Snyder, who wrote a very important and interesting essay for The Atlantic on this one, but I disagree with him. I think it's just not very, the same indications that he mentions in that article that are supposedly be pointing towards his supposed fascism can be applied to Stalin, can be applied to other dictators. So he is an authoritarian.
Hi, my name is Isabella. I'm also a student at Anglo-American, and I wanted to ask why, just to all the panelists who talked about immigration specifically. So let's be clear, when we talk about immigration, it's always securing the southern border and never the northern border, so that's first thing I want to get out of the way. But also, I live in a border state. I live in Arizona, and I have a lot of friends that go to University of Arizona in Tucson, which is actually closer to the border than it is to the capital of the state. But I would say that doing my research for voting and, you know, filling out my ballot for the election in 2 weeks, there are candidates that do mention border security, and generally a lot of times they seem to just kind of copy paste what the Trump campaign says about border security, put it on their website, say nothing else about it. So I would push back against this idea that immigration is kind of a very contentious issue in this election, and I kind of wanted to ask you guys why you think it has such a big impact.
I didn't talk about immigration, but I will say something about Trump and Harris's policies and how they compare, because I recently was listening to the interview that Harris actually gave with Fox News, and they interrogate her about, like, and I think interrogate is a light word, her on her border, you know, her southern border policy. And I think, fascinatingly so, I think, in my opinion, is that Trump and Harris's border policies don't differ too directly on key policies. You know, they both are very anti-free, you know, movement of people, especially from the southern border. And I think that's quite fascinating in the discussion about immigration in this election, because both sides don't really have a lot of disagreements, and which I think actually, to your point, kind of makes it a lesser important issue in the election, because they are so similar, just they're different in how they portray their points.
So when the question came up earlier about immigration, and I said that I thought it was second tier, in part it's because of this. It's more of a political kind of rallying point, in some ways similar to how abortion is for the Democrats. They are both very important issues in their own right. The number of voters who for them it is the key issue is very small. And the kind of magnification of the issues goes to tying them, in both cases, to the other issues that are more broadly concerned, which is the economy, housing, and inflation. So if we look at the issue of immigration, the message on immigration, if we take the more rationalist side and not the pet buffet kind of side, it goes to issues about jobs, security, and these are issues that are key to issues of the economy, issues of housing, issues of your domestic concerns beyond immigration. If the economy were doing great, if employment was doing great, if the former blue-collar manufacturing demographic was doing great, immigration wouldn't be talked about so much. When it comes to looking at actual policies, again, Trump famously told the Republicans in Congress to basically kill whatever deal there was to try and actually structurally address the issue. So the Republican politicians don't seem to care about immigration in any meaningful way or addressing it in any meaningful way. It is just this kind of political tool. Similarly with abortion, very important on its own right. There are some concerns regarding abortion because of I can't afford to have a family. I don't have a house. Not even a house. I don't have a place that I own where I can stably raise a family. There are issues attached to abortion that go beyond the issue of bodily autonomy and reproductive rights and health. There are other issues that, again, overlap with that economic and those other issues. So that's why I think that both of them are kind of second tier for those core issues that everybody's kind of competing on. I can improve the economy. No, I can improve the economy. I can solve housing. No, I can solve housing. So that's why I think those are more focused on.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up to that. Would you consider like healthcare, general like healthcare reform and that kind of thing? What would you consider that to fall under?
There's not a whole lot to talk about this time around. Yeah. Again, it's one of those issues that is incredibly important and should be talked about, but it's not being talked about.
Because you were asking all of us, right? So I just want to say what I think about the immigration is that in reality, in the real rational world, this would not be an issue at all. Because I don't think that the United States has any serious immigration issue, right? Yes, there should be more order at the southern border. That's, there's zero issue at the border with Canada. So that's why people are mostly focused on southern border, because there are people coming illegally to the United States by thousands, but that's for an economy of for a country of 340 million people, this is just nothing, right? There are no 20 million immigrants illegal immigrants in the United States. As Trump is saying, it's maybe 10, 11 million at the most, and the economy needs them. The problem is obviously that this has been demagogued by especially the right over the last 20 years to the point that it brought Donald Trump to the office, right? This was the issue in 2016 that made him the president. Immigration. So you cannot avoid it. Therefore, she has moved reasonably to the right on this issue, and she now agrees to a significant reform of asylum policy, which is the most conservative reform that has ever been proposed. But in reality, this is just largely a made-up issue. If you look at all these issues that the United States has to deal with, this is just something that has been created by the media, unfortunately.
A very, very short contribution from me. I think America being the land of immigrants, it means that there will be always some form of immigration. And I just recently was reading about Abraham Lincoln, who in his time supported immigration and Ondřej tariffs. Abraham Lincoln spoke about tariffs. So I do agree with Tomáš that immigration is not to be neglected, but it's not the main issue in reality. Maybe in the campaign, yes, but other than that, no.
I didn't want to address the issue of immigration because I agree with Tomáš that's not serious or difficult issue to address, but I must. How many illegal immigrants there should be in a country? And the only correct answer is 0. 0. Citizens must decide how many immigrants we will accept. Let us say all of them, okay. If it is a result of a democratic process, all of them, or 0. that's legal immigrants. But illegal immigrants, no at all. And unfortunately, American administrations, both Republican, Democratic, accepted them as something like a natural fact. Like, we try to control climate, we try to stop climate change, physical forces we try to stop, and we believe that we cannot stop a flow of peoples. That's the purpose of politics, to regulate people's behavior. So, of course, Trump overreacting, overestimating, and so on, demagogic, bullshit, of course. But in principle, he's right. If there is one more illegal immigrant, that's one more which shouldn't be there in the United States.
Well, I'm enjoying this discussion or contribution of your opinions. It's wonderful, and especially to Roman Joch, that he just mentioned the key word, and that is illegal immigration. Nobody is against immigrants coming in. Tomáš estimated, 10, 11 million illegals. The number I have heard is 18 million. And whatever it is, I agree with Roman Joch that anything above zero should be objected to. And it may not be a very important issue, as important as the economy, and that is also, I'm sure, certainly right. And because I like markets, I would bring to your attention one figure that I thought I would never discuss publicly, and that is the price of gold, which is up 40% over the past year. And that's a reflection of the uncertainty in the world. You may have heard Mr. Fink, Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, mention that it doesn't really matter for markets who wins, whether it's Kamala or Trump. The US economy will do fine. I'm surprised that it was Ondřej Hejma who was the only one to mention tariffs. Yes, Lincoln was in favor. In fact, the Civil War was largely fought over tariffs because the South, exporting cotton and tobacco, imported everything and wanted no tariffs, while the North was just building up its industry and wanted tariff protection. And there's no agreement among economists, and I take usually great pride as a non-economist to point this fact, but also to point fact that tariffs have their very useful function. And I think we may see them coming back. I vote in Massachusetts, so it doesn't really matter how I vote. But I enjoyed Roman Joch's argument against Trump. I also object to him, especially his behavior on the 6th of January 2020, which is, everything you could say bad about somebody who undermines the Constitution, etc. And I am really angry at the Democrats that Trump is in play still today. Because the way the Democrats did away with Biden, who after all was elected through a primary process that lasted over 6 months, and then beheaded by the Democratic Party after, yes, a terrible, disastrous performance in that first debate, but nonetheless, one who was selected by the primary process. I suspect that had the Democrats chosen any white male from among the top 20 that you could think of, Trump would be history. And what I fear is that what we're watching in slow motion is a repeat of the 2016 election, where Hillary was thought to be in the running, and so Gwyneth's nightmare might be repeating. And all the nightmare scenarios will come to be true. If you compare Trump to Kamala, if you compare the political platforms of the two parties, I can find on each side so many things to criticize and to take exception to that it's very disappointing. One Englishman said it very nicely. It's like choosing between cholera and the plague. And there's much to be said about that. Recall that Trump has 4 years of experience as president behind him. He's a known slate. None of you mentioned that. Most voters would prefer the devil they know than the devil they do not know. And the devil they do not know is a product of San Francisco politics. What can we say about San Francisco? It has no Republican Party. It's a one-party state today, despite Reagan, after his demise. And it engages in civil war, permanent civil war, at the level of San Francisco politics. Now, I agree that Kamala is a very impressive woman. She speaks in complete sentences, unlike the New Yorker. And she, I like her, but I'm not sure she's electable.
About the nomination of Kamala, which leaves a stain. It's not a main issue in the election, but it leaves a stain. There's a smell of something strange. And I will have to remind everybody that many names were mentioned. Hillary, Michelle Obama, Gavin Newsom, many others, and they all said no. And the rumor in the Trumpian world then was that Kamala was the only one to take it, which kind of supports your point.
Can I respond to this? Well, just very briefly. Okay, the nomination process, this is a non-issue. Republicans are trying to make an issue out of this, but it's really up to the parties who they nominate. And they nominated someone at the Congress, in Chicago at the convention, right? So, yes, you can have primaries. You don't have to have primaries. If I want to be really nitpicky, I would say there were no real primaries, right? Well, he was more like a bride and coronation. So it's really a non-issue. In terms of the product of San Francisco politics, this is I definitely disagree with. She is a product of that kind of politics, but she now has assembled a coalition from the very left of American political field to center right, right? And she's trying to hold it together. I was listening to her Chicago speech in Chicago in the United Center, and the speech could have been delivered by John McCain without one single change. She is really trying hard to not be San Francisco product. Yeah, that's about. Oh, white males. Well, I don't know, right? I don't know if they nominated a white male, that would have been much clearer. Yes, maybe she would be. Maybe the white male would be doing better among men than she is. But what about the blacks and minorities, right? Right, like they would have felt disappointed that she was kind of skipped over, and so I don't know what would I suspect the situation would be very similar. American electorate is divided, and we are just fighting for that, maybe 4% of the electorate, 7 million people in 7 states.
I just wanted to add one point to that. I think one of the other unique things about this election in particular and the last maybe 2 elections is that the traditional monoliths for the parties have not just shifted, but they've also broken down. So talking about minority votes, it's not a minority and their vote now, it's being split also along gender lines, economic lines. And so this makes the kind of regular run-of-the-mill predictions about, well, this electorate's locked up, this electorate's locked up. It's really thrown that into question.
My name is Jaroslav Kramáš. I was born in Olomouc, grew up in Moravia, did my studies in Switzerland, France, Switzerland, United States. Altogether, I lived in US 26 years. For 15 years, I worked in 44 out of 50 states, saving, crushing companies. I had over 300 clients over there, never failed. Okay, so my experience, what I'm going to say, is based on my life experience of a binational, got both passports. So, my fellow Ondřej, I'm sorry, I'm orders of magnitude pro-Trump above him, okay? So if you have something to say critical on Trump, send it to me, leave him alone. If I may, I would like to ask a couple questions, all of you, including the panel. Since the name of Trump came several times here in the discussion. First question, how many of you, raise hand, who read The Art of the Deal? 2. Okay? 2. Second question. I'm coming, don't you worry. My point is coming, don't know I know what I'm doing. Second point, in 2016, Trump won some 80 million plus minus something voters. Surprise, Czech television, like you said, not totally unexpected. Would anybody please explain to me how come that Trump, who had all the media, everybody against him, managed to win? Which leads me to my second question. How many of you have seen one or more episodes of The Apprentice? Okay. I'm getting to the point. I lived there. I knew Trump since early 2000s. Okay, not 2016 like the girl here, it's early 2000s. 2008, I was part of the Tea Party in Southern California. I lived there, the discontent of the people with the regime. As a matter of fact, in this country, we lived it with Babiš. Babiš was precedent to Trump. There's many similarities. So please study Art of the Deal and understand The Apprentice, because the United States, for several seasons, had the opportunity every week watch The Apprentice, in which he showed his competence, fairness, knowledge, skills, and everything. You all here are talking about something, somebody you don't know. Please, a little bit humility, and don't talk about something that you don't know, okay? There's lots of comments about Trump, fascist, and all that. Which brings me to the explanation of the term fascist. I'll be very brief and very simple. I'll simplify it for those, and especially students, okay? Please, this is something that I realized, I'm 73 now. I realized that much later on in my life. In old Greece, we had Plato, philosopher. Plato was saying the society is the most important, individuum is secondary. His student, Aristotle, was saying, no, individual is primary, society is secondary. From Plato's philosophy, we got Kant, Hegel, Marx, Engels, and politicians inspired by these philosophies, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, Sobotka, socialist. Hitler's party was a national socialist party, socialist. American Democrats are socialists, okay? Europe was built on socialist philosophy. United States is built on Aristotle's philosophy, okay? This is the fundamental what people don't understand. There is a philosophical difference between the two continents. Trump is ultimate individual. Okay?
I think we understand you, and we can let others react and continue with the informal discussion later.
Wait, can I simplify? NATO makes no sense because of Aristotle and Plato. That's the claim.
Socialist Spartakiadi and the meetings of German Hitlerjugend were the same. Socialists and fascists are the same philosophy. Trump is opposite, is individualistic. Fascism was born from the socialists. Three biggest criminals in history, Hitler, Stalin, and Mao, were all defending the socialist philosophy of Europe. Okay, Trump is individualist.
I would just briefly react that I think there's a flaw in the logic that a ghost-written book and a scripted show tells us who Trump actually is. Sorry? Art of the Deal was ghost-written. Trump didn't write it, and the show was scripted, so it's not really getting to know him.
Yeah, I've been following Trump in the United States since the early 1990s because I was fascinated by him as kind of like a phenomenon, and I wrote 2 books about him, and one was just published this past week. So I do know a bit about him, and I read The Art of the Deal. Do not waste time. Do not read. Do not bother. It's just like Tony Schwartz, who wrote the book, the ghostwriter, explains it very well in a couple of interviews in 2016 how the book was written. Okay, so you should just Google up Tony Schwartz and again. The Apprentice is actually really important for understanding Trump because that's where he saved his finances, right? That's where he finally was able to get on top because he went bankrupt 6 times in the 1990s. He found his really, really important gift, and that's to be a showman in front of the camera. So if you want to understand his phenomenon and his political appeal, do watch The Apprentice, but not for the wisdom he dispenses because it's a scripted show, right? It is about his political appeal to people, right? That's relevant, but obviously it tells you nothing about the person Donald Trump.
Let me say just one thing. Once upon a time, I was a judge on the TV show known as Pop Idol. So I know something about scripted shows, and I can tell you not everybody can do it. Not everybody can do it. So it does really tell you about whether the man knows something, etc., etc. And that's it, yeah. Okay.
Okay, Gwen, do you want to mention something? Okay. So I think it's because our also technical assistants who are recording it have to leave. So I think it's also a good time to finish the debate. And I would like to thank all the panelists, mainly Joch for arranging it on behalf of the university. Secondly, to Gwyn, that she had the courage to sit among these like old white guys and chauvinists. You were great. And so thanks Tomáš, Ondřej, Hejma, Gwyn, Joch, Joch. And I would like to invite all of you. We have a second debate about the elections, which will occur on 19th November, 2 weeks after the elections. We will have different panelists, and I think it will be even more interesting if you have enjoyed this than this debate. We also do on 26th November debate devoted to the anniversary of the fall of Iron Curtain or the end of the Cold War, not remembering about who was at Národní třída, but seeing it from global perspective or at least European perspective. So you are all welcome to here. So I would like to thanks also to Jiří Schwarz, the president of the university, who is not here, but who also helped to arrange the event. And I would like to thank my new team who participated, Veselin, Martina, Helena, Susanna, and thanks once again to all of you for coming and making it possible. And I hope you not only survived that, but enjoy that. So once again, we are happy that people with different opinions, absolutely different opinions, sometimes can meet and exchange them politely. So that should be the rule. Thank you and see you soon.